In this video, I'm going to be talking about 6 tips to eliminate that backlog, that ever-growing and ever-fearful backlog. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Play Your Way, where we like to talk about the way we play and more. I am Brian, and let's talk about this backlog, right? I hear this backlog, the never-ending backlog that no one seems to get to the end of, and I guess that's kind of the point, right? Well, not necessarily. I quickly found myself in this struggle as well. Back in 2019, I very quickly got into retro gaming and retro collecting and just collecting games in general, and I found myself with over 100 games. It was a lot, and sadly enough, I only played and beat 2 games back in 2019. Ocarina of Time and Jak and Daxter. Now, yeah, fairly good games, but I probably bought 50 to 75 games in 2019 alone, and the fact that I only played 2 and beat 2 is not a good thing. So in this video, I really want to take the time and kind of lay out the 6 tips that I found helpful for myself, because it's been a 2-year process, but I've beaten 41 games, and I don't even have a backlog anymore. There's not any more games that I own that I'm like, yeah, I want to play. All the games that I have, I've already played and beaten. Now, that's not including my wife's games that are in the collection. I'm not gonna be playing Nintendogs, but she will, and that's okay. But there's games that I can buy now because I have the freedom to do so now. You know, if you don't care about a backlog and you kind of enjoy the thought of having hundreds of games and never really getting to the end of it, well then this video is not really for you. But I found myself in the middle of all that, really searching on YouTube and saying, I need some tips for backlog elimination, and I figured I would just create my own because I've kind of done it myself. I've beaten 41 games in the past 2 years. I've dropped about 10 to 12 as well, but in this video I want to lay out 6 tips. Let's get started. Number 1, and this is kind of the foundation of this video, let's be honest. Stop buying games, right? The perspective is, if you stop buying games and continue playing the games that you actually have, eventually you're going to complete that backlog. You will see the end of that backlog. And yes, it's not an easy thing to do. Completely get that. During that 2-year process, there was games that were announced, there were games that was released that I really wanted to play, and I didn't get them. I did not buy another game until I finished the games that I have. And that's really the most important thing about this, is to play the games that you have, complete the games that you have, and kind of sacrifice that purchase. Now, you could go the route, and this video is really about taking this information and adjusting it to your personal experience. If there's a game you've been waiting on for years and years, go ahead and open that gate, buy that game. Yes, add it to the backlog. You know, 1 game every few months, 1 game every year or so. It's not gonna technically hurt. In my case, I was like, you know what? I'm not buying any game. I don't care if it's a game that I've been waiting years for. It'll still be there when I have a chance to get it. It'll still be there years from now. I'll buy it then. And so I didn't purchase any games, and that really kind of cut off that ever-growing part of the backlog. I was able to just play the games that I have. I didn't buy any more. That's tip number 1. Stop buying games. Number 2. This one is a bit of a unique one because I know a lot of people are not willing to do this. I was one who was, and kind of had to do some introspection to really get to this point. But number 2, declutter your backlog. And really what I mean by that is, in my case, in 2019, there was games that I was buying left and right. Many of them were purchased at yard sales, thrift stores, flea markets, and I bought them for $1, $2, $3. They were very cheap in its core, but I found myself a year or 2 later looking at that game and not really being interested to even play it. And I could even say to myself, if I were being honest, I bought the game just to have it on the shelf, or, you know, in theory would play the game, but never really intended to and never really wanted to actually play the game. So I was like, why am I keeping this? Why is this on the backlog if I never really want to play it? If it's just on the shelf collecting dust and there's no use for it? I'm just going to declutter it. And kind of what I did is I kind of one by one did some introspection, did some reflection on each and every game. I was like, do I really want to play this? Or is this a game that I just bought just to have? And one by one, I either kept the game on the shelf with the intention of playing it, or I put it in a trade-in pile, because all these games I kind of decluttered. Thankfully, I had a trade-in pile to one day trade in to get more games that I actually do intend on playing. So that's tip number 2, declutter your backlog. Number 3, shelf or trade in a game if you are not liking it, right? Again, I mentioned earlier, I dropped and shelved games over the course of the past 2 years because I would play them and I would continue to play them, but I wasn't really liking them. And let's be honest, this hobby is about enjoying your experience. If you're not enjoying a game, it's okay to drop it, put it back on the shelf if you really want to collect it, or just put it in that trade-in pile for the next purchase that you really do want to play. And I'll be honest, this one was really hard for me because I'm one of those people who, if I start something, I want to see it to the end. I want to finish it, even if I hate it, and just grit through it. But I realized, you know what, that's not really the best way to handle this, especially it's a hobby that you want to enjoy your experience. Life is too short to continue to play games that you don't like. Shelve it or trade it. Number 4. Stick with 1 or 2 games at a time. Now, a lot of people kind of get in this trap of playing 3 to 5 games that they just continue to play and kind of go back and forth from. Next thing you know, the first game that you played, you haven't played in months, and the third game you've been playing a ton, and number 5, you've been playing okay, then where's 2 and 4 at? Stick with 1 or 2 games, dial in on those 1 or 2 games. It'll kind of make that experience a lot better anyways, because you're kind of focused on these games. In my case, I only stuck with 1 game for the majority of the time. I was like, you know what, I'm going to start this 1 game, and I'm going to finish this 1 game, and then I'll move on to the next. To me, that was the easiest way. It was kind of fun to kind of just knock them down one by one, and I really enjoyed my experience with that because I got to know the game very well instead of jumping back and forth. Now, there is a tip in here. It's actually the last tip that I'll kind of explain where you might want to add to. And again, adjust this to your own liking. If 2 games rotating back and forth help you to kind of maximize that backlog in your gaming experience, go ahead and do that. Number 4, this is a bit of an interesting one, but it's actually really fun. Co-op a game if there is ability to do so. For example, my wife and I have played numerous games back in 2020 and even this year. Co-op, you know, if the game had the ability to play the story mode co-op, and if we were available to do so, we did that. And oftentimes we're able to kind of beat a game quicker, and more so than beating it, the experience was a lot more enjoyable to actually play a game with someone else and experience that game. So if the game has co-op and if you have a friend or a partner that you want to play with, play that game with them. You can beat it quicker and you can enjoy that experience much more. We actually played Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury together. We played Knack on the PS4. We even played Four Swords Adventures on the GameCube, and if you know anything about the co-op experience on that one, well, it was kind of rough, but it was still fun nonetheless. And lastly, number 6, this is actually one of the most important ones, and that's maximize your time. Maybe you're waiting at the doctor's office, maybe you gotta get an oil change on your car, maybe you have an hour lunch break, maybe 30-minute lunch break at work, 45 minutes. Whatever the case is, maximize your time and play those games while you're waiting. Now, of course, this probably lends itself well to portability first and foremost, but if you're a fan of the Nintendo Switch, if you're a fan of a PSP, PS Vita, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, whatever the case is, bring that along with you with those times that you're kind of waiting and you're not really doing anything. In my case, this is kind of where I implemented the back and forth mode of my game catalog and my game backlog, is because I would take a portability game with me on my lunch break every day at work. I would take a Nintendo DS game usually, or Nintendo Switch game, and I would play about 45 minutes on my lunch break. I have an hour lunch break and I played about 45 minutes worth of gameplay. And in about a 5-day span, that adds up to almost 4 hours of gameplay for a game. And you know, if a game is 10 to 15 hours, you can beat that game in a month just playing it on your lunch break. That's just playing it on your lunch break and not even bringing it home and playing it there. Now, I would kind of offset it by having a console game that I would play when I get home and just kind of reserve that portability for my lunch break and kind of play a portable game. And it was a fun way to kind of break up the balance of playing a console game and also another game, playing 2 games at once. In that sense, I wasn't just kind of overwhelmed by playing 2 games. It was kind of, they were reserved for their time. Again, doctor's appointment, oil change, whatever you're waiting on, bring that game with you and play it during that time. You'll find yourself actually putting in some hours and it adds up to actually completing those games quicker. So those were 6 tips to eliminate that backlog. I get it. Some people, we just love that backlog and really don't want to see the end of it. We really don't want to actually see the end of it, but some actually want to see the end of that backlog. I'll tell you from my experience, I kind of feel free. There's not really that burden or guilt of just having so many games to get through. Now, I also am not going back into the habit of buying 10 games at a time. I'm still sticking with the value of buying 1 game at a time, and that really kind of helps kind of focus in and down on 1 game, and I don't have a backlog that's growing after I just spent 2 years trying to get rid of one. So those are 6 tips to completing your backlog. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.